The next part of the Cabana House project is plumbing. When I first started doing these videos, I really thought I'd be able to do each individual video with a specific topic, starting with tear down and then clean out, and then showing you insulation, then plumbing, then drywalling. But it turns out you don't really work on one project all the way through. You kind of have to do things in a stepwise fashion, because each step of the process isn't quite as encapsulated as I originally thought. In this video, you're going to notice progression in the background that I'm not really mentioning. There'll be later videos where I kind of go through how I did the insulation or drywall or whatever. In the video clip here, you can see Davis and I working on the shower stall. It's a package that I got from Ace Hardware, and it was inspired by a shower that's in the basement of my wife's grandma's house. It's pretty nice because you can quasi-permanently install it, but it's also easy to move. It doesn't involve putting down like a real shower pan or tiling an area. I know it's a little hard to tell from the video clip, but this is actually the first time Davis has truly helped me with the project. Now I know he's been in other videos helping and handing me tools and being playful, but in this case, my arms weren't long enough to reach around the shower stall to hold the nut and turn the screw at the same time. This was actually a two-person project, and Davis did a great job holding the screws and turning the screwdriver for me. It took forever to build the shower, and honestly I was shocked at how willing he was to hang in there. Usually for a kid his age, they would lose interest in just a couple of minutes, but he was really into holding the screw and turning it for me. Once he managed to lose a little bit of interest, I recruited Sarah to finish the project, but Davis decided to do a little bit of videography. Probably the biggest trick with the shower stall was just not over-tightening any screws, as I'm putting metal screws into plastic. Once the frame was done, I had to work on the floor, and here's Davis helping me put the drain in place. Another part of the project where Davis was a big help was seating the floor and the edges of the stall. You got it all in? Once the stall was assembled, Sarah helped me check the fit, and we put it into position. The next thing we need to do is to actually run the water. Some of the copper piping has been done, but Wayne, Sarah's dad, came over to help me finish the rest of it. I hadn't done much plumbing, but he actually is certified in plumbing and taught me a lot. We went back and forth a few times trying to decide the material we would use to bring the water in. In the end, we decided to go with traditional copper because Wayne had more experience with this. We had also read online that sometimes mice or rats will chew on the PVC or PEX tubing, and since this garage or cabana house isn't going to be occupied all the time, we didn't want to get into any trouble with rodents moving in and damaging things. You can see Wayne prepping the tubing, sanding it and tinning it and getting it ready to put the solder in place. All of this was new to me, and it was good to learn. I bought 2 sinks for the bathroom/shower area. That way we can set one of them to wheelchair height to make it a little bit more accessible. After figuring out where the sinks and the shower would be located, we had to pull the copper pipe through the wall and stub it out in the right location. Pulling the piping through the holes in the 2x4s was definitely a pain, and probably my least favorite part of the project. Next, we had to run the drain pipes that bring the water out of the cabana house. And to do that, I had to put a 2-inch hole through a couple of bricks. This was not a fun process either, but Davis was happy to help. He did a lot of vacuuming, and don't worry, I made him wear hearing protection the whole time. Next, we hung some plywood along the studs where the sinks would be located. This allows us a lot of wiggle room when installing the sinks. If you don't do this, you have to put the sinks directly on the 2x4s or the studs, and it kind of limits where you can put them left to right. I tried to make each part of this project a bit flexible in its location. That way, as we go along, we can move it if we find that it's difficult to get to with a wheelchair. Now we put together some plans on how exactly the sinks and the shower are going to drain out of the cabana house. After that, we went to the hardware store and picked out all the angles and started cutting them to length. Planning everything out, then finding the actual parts was harder than I realized. Putting it together was the fun part. We didn't want to dig into the foundation because the building is sitting on a concrete slab, and we also didn't want to put the drain pipes behind the drywall. That way things are a bit more accessible, so it made our planning a bit more unique. The good news is, if there's ever a problem, it'll be easy to repair because everything isn't buried behind the wall or the insulation. During this process, I also learned how tricky it is to make sure you're going downhill the whole time. You don't want a spot that goes slightly uphill or is completely flat, or you'll get stagnant water stuck in the pipe. We put blocks of wood and shims on the floor just to keep everything in place and to make sure we were traveling the right direction downhill. Once all the drain pipe was in place and properly sealed and dry, it was time to move on to the water that's coming into the sink. The first thing we had to do was cut the stubs off and put valves in place. There was a little bit of water behind it, so I managed to make a big mess. We really thought we had drained everything, but apparently it wasn't the case. Fortunately, after water got everywhere, I was just able to run a fan and dry everything out before the final fit. Once the valves for the hot and cold water were in place, it was a bit less complicated because we got to use flexible tubing that went from the valve to the taps on the sink. This was refreshing after having to cut everything perfectly with the drain tube. Here we are, excited to run our first test and bleed all the air out of the system and to make sure that nothing is leaking. Shockingly, we didn't find a lot of places that needed tightening up. Next up was to install the shower head. This wasn't too bad because the shower isn't fixed in place. It allows us to move it around a little bit and get some space between the wall. We use the same flexible tubing, which again is nice because you don't have to cut things so perfectly. The kit came with a simple single shower head. We decided to replace it with an inexpensive wand shower head. The shower being a little bit small, it's kind of nice to be able to pop it down and get to all the nooks and crannies you need to. Because we're not drilling down through the foundation to run the drain pipe, the shower stall has to be raised up a little bit to allow gravity to drain the water. We built a platform and it worked perfectly. This setup again gave us a bit of flexibility if we ever needed to move something later on, and it prevented us from damaging the foundation. The only trick was we had to shim the pipe a little bit so that we could get a tight fit on the drain pipe and where the drain goes through the bottom of the shower. It took a little bit of elbow grease to get everything to fit together, but in the end we got it. After getting all the incoming and outgoing pipes put together and sealed, it was time to test our project. Shockingly, everything seemed to work and the water was running, both hot and cold. Next, I installed some light fixtures. I had actually removed them from the bathroom in the house when we installed new ones. These were originally hardwired, but I decided to change it to a plug because it was difficult to run the wires behind the wall in the way I wanted to. With everything finally installed, we get to test our project. We have a deep sink with hot and cold running water, a refrigerator with an ice maker and water running through the door, a pair of sinks with some mirrors and a light, and a shower. As far as the toilet goes, we're probably going to stick with a composting toilet because it's a lot less complicated. Once the composting toilet is totally set up and properly vented, maybe Wayne and I will do a video on that one as well. But for now, we're just going to go inside the house to use the bathroom.